SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
So as South Africa prepares to take center stage during the G20 engagements, the country's persistently high unemployment rate and sluggish job creation remain top priorities, and this is for civil society. The Institute for Economic Justice has joined national stakeholders for a focused dialogue on the G20 platform and how this can be leveraged to drive inclusive growth, expand the employment opportunities and strengthen the labor market. For more on this now, we're joined virtually by Dr. Gilad Isaacs, who's IEJ Executive Director. Thank you so much for your time on the program. So South Africa is taking center stage in the G20. Just why is this moment so important, particularly for the country's economic agenda when we talk unemployment? Because unemployment has remained stubbornly high.
Yes, thanks very much for the invitation. I think it's important to understand what the G20 is and isn't, and its limits and opportunities. The G20 is obviously an international focused forum with the 20 countries, the EU, the AU, and invited members. And it focuses obviously therefore on a multilateral level. That doesn't offer necessarily the opportunity to make domestic policy. But South Africa, as a small, open economy integrated into global markets, is impacted in very important ways by both global trends and global policies. So, for instance, one of the areas which the South African government has put emphasis on is on sustainable industrial policy. So that's policies that are a part of the energy and climate transitions. And what we've seen there, and reports coming out about this on Thursday, is that there are numerous multilateral barriers to the implementation of sustainable industrial policies. So those might be, for instance, through the World Trade Organization regulation, through bilateral investment treaties, through the differential access to international finance. And so how the global economy is regulated often has a profound impact on what smaller, in particular, developing countries can and can't do.
Yeah, and if there's a popular term or phrase during this period, Mr. Isaacs, is inclusive growth, right? We keep hearing of inclusive growth. Just what does this term look like practically so, and how would we be able to measure success as far as this term is concerned?
Yeah. So the G20's overall aim is to, aim for a balanced and inclusive growth. But of course, it's a contested idea of what that means. How we would interpret it, which is, I think, in line with the South African and other global South governments, would be that we want a global economic architecture where every country has a fair shot, right? Where the rules of the playing field don't inordinately favor certain countries at the outset. And unfortunately, the reality is that we exist in an international system where that isn't true, where the rules are lopsided, where the US can, undertake unilateral trade measures like we've seen recently, or where African governments pay 3 times more for their borrowing than European governments, and these lopsided starting points within the international system means that we don't. Well, it makes inclusive growth much harder, right? And so inclusive growth needs to be premised on an international financial and trade and other architecture, which really allows every country a equal starting point.
And, you know, this points to a need to have all hands on deck, particularly where the problem of unemployment is concerned. When we look at reforms, when we look at the policy front as well, just what commitments should government be making?
Yeah, you know, I think that at the G20, the South African government's going to be quite limited, right? It is negotiating with a range of other international partners. Some of those governments are run by very conservative parties right now. And so I think our expectations of the summit should be tempered. That, of course, doesn't mean that our expectations of government should be tempered. You know, we've recently, last week, had a tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement by the National Treasury, in which unemployment was only mentioned once. You know, as far as we're concerned, that shows a dereliction of duty and a lopsided priorities by the National Treasury. And so there's no doubt that in South Africa, separate to the G20, there's numerous policy tools which we have available to us, whether that's fiscal policy, monetary policy, industrial policy, labor market policy, and these should be concentrated on the very real challenge of unemployment in South Africa. And unfortunately, that's not the type of laser-sharp focus which is coming out of government at the moment.
And here's the thing, all of this comes with its own risks and challenges, but we must also balance it with those realistic expectations. If we leverage this and leverage it correctly and right, what would South Africa's labour market look like in the next 5 years or so?
I mean, I don't think the G20 itself provides a fundamental turning for South Africa's labour market. So, you know, I think that we can make incremental gains on the international stage. I do think we have a host of domestic policy tools which we're making inadequate use of. What we've seen on this recent budget, for instance, is a 0.7% cuts on average to non-interest expenditure over the medium term. That means less investments in classrooms, in hospitals, in teachers, nurses, police force, roads, infrastructure. Even this 1 trillion invested in infrastructure is less than half of what we need to meet the National Development Plan targets by 2030. So absolutely, South Africa is a wealth of people looking for employment, a society full of innovation and ideas, but we really need the policy support, access to financing, and the stimulation of employment opportunities in both public and private sector. And what we should be aiming for is the creation of at least 1 million jobs every year.
We certainly will need all hands on deck. I must thank you so much for your time and insights. That's Dr. Gilad Isaacs, who's IEJ Executive Director. Thanks so much indeed for your time.